That's kind of Camus' point, though. Life makes no sense. Because, obviously. Better than food, man. Shit. There goes the air conditioner. Not again! Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Belly Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Hope you're doing well. Great to see you as always. Today is an extremely overdue book and my personal choice for a summer beach read. Today is The Stranger by the French-Algerian author Albert Camus, published in 1942. He wrote it when he was 29. The fucker. God. Won the Nobel Prize. Camus was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957. Man, translated by Matthew Ward, who passed away, unfortunately. I'm underslept and in that kind of Meursault / Camus state of mind. Get that coffee. Tired, blurry, fatigued, but pleasantly, so everything starts to kind of merge into the same thing, right? Which is a poetic state of things, if I understand Michel Houellebecq correctly, which I've been reading this collection of essays by him called Interventions 2020. I'm going to review it soon. It's really good. Anyways, L'étranger, The Stranger, sometimes translated as The Outsider, by Camus, is considered by Le Monde to be the best book of the 20th century out of 100 on their list, and not just French titles. It's like from all over the world, all the great books of the 20th century. They say the best one is The Stranger, for good reason. It's a perfect book, in my opinion. It's monumental, but only in so few words. I hesitate to say the novel proves anything. It just presents a very radically for the time, different way of looking at the world, as opposed to the normal good, bad, beginning, end, meaningful fashion that up until this point in culture had, for the most part, been widely accepted as correct. The time of the book's publication was a time of massive upheaval, to say the least. It was published in Nazi-occupied France in 1942. The sentiment of the book that is so profound is that life, ultimately when all is said and done, is completely meaningless. That's the crux, basically. And, you know, Camus, after he wrote this, I think went on to write the essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. I can never fucking say that correct. And I haven't read that, but that's in the mail. So our character, Meursault, this young man in French Algeria, doesn't believe in an afterlife and is, to some degree, comfortable in his assertions, like it doesn't necessarily trouble him philosophically, and even occasionally content. He's not hoping for something better at all. He is engaged with and appreciative of what is. Like, you know, he believes that life is pretty much meaningless. He behaves in such a way, but he doesn't use that as a justification to do bad, per se. He isn't evil for the sake of being evil. He doesn't enjoy being cruel to people. But some actions come across to others like he does. It gets misinterpreted. And that's what the whole story is about, because he becomes wrapped up in a crime. He commits murder. But the way he commits murder is not the usual way that somebody would commit murder. It's almost by chance. It's almost by accident. It's an amazingly ambiguous novel. So, just like life is amazingly ambiguous. And I liked that. That felt a lot like the truth, in my experience. At the end of the day, though, that's all it is. That's all this is. You know, it's our experience. You know, mine is my experience, yours is your experience, and so on. Our experience. And, you know, that's what a novel is. It's, you know, communicating the experience of the author. It's the formulation and communication of the individual experience. Hopefully, unless it's a bad novel, in which case it's more of like trying to be something else, trying to be somebody else. And as this interesting documentary said that I've linked below, we are all individuals cut off from the world, every single one of us. That was Camus' big discovery. It resonates profoundly to this day. Aside from the writing itself, which is, like, you know, superb, it raises some of the most interesting questions ever posed in literature. That is to say, really, the questions. And this is one of my favorite books. I read it when I was in my early 20s. I can't remember where or when. I'm sure many of you have read it, and the story is simple. After his mother has recently passed away, and the opening line, the very, very famous opening line references that, a young man named Meursault gets wrapped up in some events that lead him to do something seemingly very out of character. He kills a man on the beach with a gun, shooting him several times. By the way, this summer when you're at the beach reading this book, and this is the perfect book for the beach, if you want some stylish sun protection, and who doesn't, please check out the sponsor of today's video, Simply Carbon Fiber. Simply Carbon Fiber is a luxury lifestyle brand that produces everyday products from aerospace-grade carbon fiber, and they make durability look stylish. They make these awesome sunglasses in tons of different styles. Definitely a good thing to have for the season. This is the Marina model, carbon fiber sunglasses. It's pretty rad. Carbon fiber, polarized lenses, and acetate frames. They also make these awesome watches. This is the Astro model with a carbon fiber watch face there, stainless steel metal links. Awesome. You can get 10% off your order today by going to simplycarbonfiber.com/BTF and using the code BTF10. The link is below. Thanks a bunch. Now, it wasn't just totally random. Meursault befriended a guy, kind of a low-life guy, it seems, who beat up this fellow's sister, this fellow who Meursault shoots. The book is composed of the events leading up to this one, and the events that follow afterwards when Meursault is arrested and tried in court. It's a first-person narrative, so we're inside Meursault's head the entire time, and we're seeing his thought process, which is very, very, very unusual, very different than normal people's. It's so tranquil and subdued and simple and kind of straight to the point. It's not riddled with anxiety. It's not as frightened as most people. It's really interesting. But it's also like he doesn't understand why people behave the way they do and make basically, what he would probably say through his eyes, like make such a big fuss of things, become so emotional. He's kind of like what I imagine the experience of being a psychopath is like, but not in a way that is cruel or that seeks to hurt people. He's kind of like psychopath light or something. It's like he doesn't have extreme emotional volatility, even when things get really bad. He does experience good and bad emotions, but there's sort of, it's just like either like pleasant contentment or like mild irritation or annoyance. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really go further than that the entire time. So it's a very interesting kind of routine, responsible existence that he leads. It's strange. It's highly influential, incredibly thought-provoking, and I think short enough to get through in one afternoon if you're a fast reader. It's an ideal book. You might want to take your time with this one though, because it's written in sort of like a Hemingway style or sort of like a hard-boiled fashion, very, very truncated, minimalist sentences. It's really about what's not being said. It's all about the space between the words. It's an ideal book for me. Not for everyone though. For some, it makes no sense. Some people just find it totally useless, basically. Like his whole point of view. They find his a friend of mine said that it seemed very bleak to him. And in a way, I mean, of course it is, in a way, one could argue, but I think there's also like an immense freedom in Meursault's way of thinking. It almost seems Buddhist to me. It's very, very cool, quite literally. It is not affected, it is not reactive like most people, it's quite aware of the futility of everything over a long enough timeline. And thus he's kind of aware of his death, it seems, almost in a way, and has sort of internalized that to the point where the meaninglessness of everything no longer frightens him, and he's kind of able to just exist and partake in the wonderful things about life that are available. That's how I saw it. It's not a utilitarian philosophy, for sure. It's not like something you can use. That might have been another of my friend's complaints about the character. Like, there's nothing you can take away from this that's going to be useful. Because that's not what it's about. It's actually kind of like about the ultimate uselessness of everything. The trouble with our language is that when these words are coming out of my mouth, you'll probably have a very negative reaction to them, and there will be some sort of immediate thing that pops up, some sort of immediate defense thing that will say it's a very pessimistic or negative outlook. which is fine if you want to call it that. But it's bigger than that. It's not that simple. That's kind of Camus' point, though. Life makes no sense. Because, obviously, sense is a structure we invent to try and understand the mechanisms working all around and through us, the ones our organic body is a part of, and the ones that govern the environment that we live in. But inevitably, all is chaos, and we're thrown back into the void, all of us. Our bodies disintegrate, yet the sun still rises, and people go on living until the exact same thing happens to them, and it happens every single day, in more or less dramatic ways, and has been, to the best of our knowledge, for millions and millions of years, in various forms and permutations that have come and gone. And as far as we can tell, hopefully will keep happening for millions and millions of years down the road. In fact, the very concepts beginning and end start to seem bizarre when you think about it. And what is responsible for all of this is the sun, which is very interesting, because that is a big focal point of the book. The focal point. So what do you do with that, right? What do you do with that? As far as the meaning of life, it's very ambiguous. And that's the point of the novel. Whether life turns out one way or the other, whether a person does something or doesn't, it doesn't matter. It ends the same. We all get to the same place. So is that good or bad? Or is it right or wrong? Is it what do you do with that? I think a lot of people will have a really strong negative reaction to this one because it definitely doesn't give you anything. And that's the whole thing. This doesn't tell you how to live your life. That's one of the beautiful, beautiful things about the novel. One of the wonderful things about the novel, because there are so many fucking moral novels that are always telling you what you should do. What you should do. Forget should. Like I said in the last video I did. There's no should. Forget the should, right? But the book itself, there's something beautiful about those simple lines, something really poetic containing layers of mystery and insight. There's so much underneath one sentence in this book, maybe the opening one especially. How did he do it? Like Camus? I don't know. I have no idea. At 29, this is a novel that would be considered kind of spectacular for somebody in their 60s. Age is not necessarily a sign of wisdom. As we got here from the translator's note, right in the beginning, the very first words, the stranger demanded of Camus the creation of a style at once literary and profoundly popular, an artistic sleight of hand that would make the complexities of a man's life appear simple. Despite appearances, though, neither Camus nor Meursault ever tried to make things simple for themselves. Indeed, in the mind of a moralist, simplification is tantamount to immorality, and Meursault and Camus are each moralists in their own way. What little Meursault says or feels or does resonates with all he does not say, all he does not feel, all he does not do. The simplicity of the text is merely apparent and everywhere paradoxical. And it is, and that's, I think many of us will pick up on that on the first page, the first paragraph maybe. And if you're like me, you'll probably fall in love with it because it's, you just sense what's underneath this thing, and it's to use a word that's probably used too much, profound. What is said is just as important as what is not. Between the lines are these oceans of subtext. A problem with you and I is that we live in an age with so much documented material, right? So many artworks, so much philosophy and writing and analyses and criticism that we mostly, speaking from my own experience, just feel this constant imposter syndrome whenever we set out to make something. How could we not? Look at your historical competition. And maybe competition is the real problem. Competition is the issue. Were we born slightly more isolated, who knows what kind of brilliant artworks we would have created. Maybe stuff better than Shakespeare. Or maybe this is the wrong way of thinking about things. Maybe it's just necessary to build on the layers of society before you. Or maybe it's more complicated than that and it's somewhere between. I wonder if Shakespeare felt everything had been done. Who knows, man? Camus won the Nobel Prize for The Stranger. And 18 years after it was published, he died suddenly in a car crash with his friend. It seems to me that Meursault absolutely is Camus in more ways than not. It's a fictional autobiography, a placing of a character who is very much you or composed of certain very real parts of you in a fictional story in order to demonstrate the truth of how you feel about life and yourself and society or whatever. This works better in some parts than others, but overall, I think the book is a triumph. I think Camus felt he really was playing a different game than the society that he was born into. Many of us can relate. Many people could then as well. I mean, you know, and aside from the meaning behind the book, you know, the style itself is brilliantly original, very poetic. All of these elements in the novel oppress Meursault. The sun is just, it's like almost following him. They blend together and become indistinguishable, representing this all-consuming, omnipresent, exhausting irritation. Life itself, maybe, something to be constantly battled, which makes me just think about the myth of Sisyphus, which came after this. Indeed, after reading this book, one feels as if they've been subjected to blinding sunlight with no cloud cover, followed by retreats to a dark, cold room to smoke, over and over again. It's very similar atmospherically for me to Godard's Alphaville, or La Jetée by Chris Marker, great film, short film, or some scenes like the dream scenes in Fellini's 8½. What is the one where Marcello Mastroianni goes and he sees the priests? I don't know, these silences in black and white. The funeral for his mother in the beginning is a good example in the book, the scene with the funeral. That's actually very similar to the scene where Marcello goes and sees the priests. It's like these two parties sitting on either side of the coffin facing each other for hours. And Meursault is just sitting there staring at these people, and they're staring back at him. And you really just from the get-go get this feeling of the divide of his isolation culturally. Yeah, Camus has said in so many words that our character Meursault is not playing the same game as society. I've met people like this, you know, people with this kind of detachment, right? And sometimes that's actually a symptom of like something like depression, but I think at least. But Meursault isn't depressed and not even unhappy, except when he's imprisoned, naturally. He's kind of childlike in a way. There's this kind of purity or innocence to him, which I think a lot of us are chasing after, whether we realize it or not. But he's always aware of the futility, right, of everything, and his expectations of life are tempered as such. But of course, this is all called into question when he commits the crime that he does. Why he commits the crime is, of course, the subject of much debate. But the entire point of the book is that it doesn't matter one way or the other why he did it. The Arab man will die, Meursault will die, and the sickening sun will continue burning the eyes of mankind. You see, I just can't help but think of the son of Georges Bataille, the dying star that gives off obscene, excessive amounts of solar energy, responsible for all life on Earth, and that will eventually just burn out. There was some sort of correspondence between the two as well, between Camus and Bataille. I don't know much about it though. I'm still learning about all these ties and relationships. There's a lot that was going on in the middle of the 20th century in France between all these people. I don't even want to get started on the relationship between Camus and Sartre. That's something I'm still researching. I will say that I've never cared for anything written by Sartre. I read Nausea, which is supposed to be like the other existentialist novel, and it just didn't strike me the same way as The Stranger did. I don't know, I thought it was kind of boring. These two books are often associated with each other. Camus shunned the term existentialist, though. Albert Camus was born in Algeria to French parents and was a writer, playwright, and philosopher. One of the most famous cultural icons of the 20th century, and was one of, if not the most famous French, philosophers at the time. I'm sure it helped that he was very good looking. He was associated with absurdism, which was the idea that life is inherently meaningless, is inherently absurd. And existentialism, of course, which he distanced himself from. He was a hell of a guy, packed a lot of life into 46 years, Handsome, charismatic in his own way, kind of athletic it seems, boxed, in a word, cool. It's interesting, I'm reading Crime and Punishment right now, and it's fascinating to compare the two novels, to compare the two murders and murderers. Raskolnikov is very different than Meursault. I might do a video comparing the two down the road. Camus was a fan of Dostoevsky and adapted The Possessed for stage. There's some scenes from that in this documentary I've linked to below. Great documentary. Meursault's outlook is not a justification for evil, Meursault, I know it's hard to tell from the description, does not appear to be an evil man. That's just the point, right? From the description, he seems like a heartless, callous bastard. That's the whole picture of him presented in court, which of course is very easy to do. But then you see from his perspective. You see how lost he is to understand the game other people are playing, and just how different his perspective naturally seems to be. And it does have this kind of naturalness to it. Like what he's saying is true, it's the truth, but it's the truth that everybody else avoids. I saw that there was a Turkish film adaptation, a Turkish film called Yazgı, which means fate or destiny. And that struck me. The book's narrative has such a feeling of fate to it. Like there is no possible other outcome for Meursault other than killing the man on the beach. It was inevitable, like Meursault's own death. And the world doesn't care, ultimately, like the world itself. Nevertheless, people will rage against it. And there's a very slight dry humor to the whole thing. It's like films by Aki Kaurismäki or Wim Wenders or Jim Jarmusch. There is, beneath the minimalist lines, such profoundly shattering emotion, it's difficult to begin to emphasize properly just how much of a genius Camus was. I doubt he knew it himself. He was 29 when he wrote this. He had truly found the right style and subject. It's a perfect book. The tragedy of the whole thing culminates and really hits you on page 114. Let's see here. So he's thinking about the outcome for his case while he's imprisoned. I would assess my holdings and get the maximum return on my thoughts. I'd always begin by assuming the worst. My appeal was denied. Well, so I'm going to die. Sooner than other people will, obviously, but everybody knows life isn't worth living. Deep down, I knew perfectly well that it doesn't much matter whether you die at 30 or at 70, since in either case, other men and women will naturally go on living, and for thousands of years. In fact, nothing could be clearer. Whether it was now or 20 years from now, I would still be the one dying. At that point, what would disturb my train of thought was the terrifying leap I would feel my heart take at the idea of having 20 more years of life ahead of me. But I simply had to stifle it by imagining what I'd be thinking in 20 years when it would all come down to the same thing anyway. Since we're all going to die, it's obvious that when and how don't matter. Therefore, and the difficult thing was not to lose sight of all the reasoning that went into this therefore, I had to accept the rejection of my appeal. Also, for further listening, try the post-punk classic Killing of an Era by The Cure. I know the title's a little off-putting, but it's a great song, and it tries to capture the essence of the book. It's pretty good. I think some people really dislike the book and would argue that it's fundamentally useless. And all I can say in reply is, yes, precisely, you got the point. Better than food. So you should read it. Anybody, everybody. This is one of the greatest books of all time. Definitely, everybody should read The Stranger. It's short, it's not much of a time investment, and if you're, even if you dislike it, like really dislike it, you're going to learn so much about yourself and the world and life that it'll overall be a net positive, I'd say. Just as important as knowing what you like is knowing what you dislike. Sometimes more important. So what did I dislike? I thought the scene near the end with the priest could have been more convincing. It was fine for the age Camus was when he wrote it, and at the time it was written, you know, the church had a lot more power. There was probably a lot more a pressure to conform. But if he were to rewrite that scene when he was older, I bet he could have kept the same structure, but really given Meursault some things to grapple with, you know? I just thought the priest character could have been written stronger. There's more convincing arguments or questions he could have posed, I feel. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but it could have just been a stronger philosophical debate, basically. But I think the rest of the book is still strong, so it doesn't ruin it for me. All right. Coffee time. Ugh, just bit my mouth. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching. Glad to have you. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video to the show. I place their names in this mason jar. I pull out a name for every review I do, and whoever's name I pull out, I send them a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. Right now it's from Myanmar, and so if you win, you're going to get Myanmar coffee and The Stranger by Albert Camus, and you're going to have a great day. That is a fine way to spend an afternoon. If you're interested in supporting the show, I sincerely appreciate it. You can click on the link below and donate $5 or more per video. Thank you very much sincerely. I really appreciate you helping me keep this whole thing going. If you donate $1 or more per video, you'll get access to the Patron-Only Reviews, the Discord channel, plus the Better Than Friday newsletter that I send out every Friday, which is just a list of 5 different things I'm interested in at any given time. Could be books in the pipeline, music, films, articles, changes week to week. If you think we have similar taste, I think you'll enjoy that. Unfortunately, international shipping is not included. Sorry about that. Thank you very much to all the patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Vera M. Thank you very much, Vera. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive The Stranger by Albert Camus, plus some delicious coffee from Myanmar, and I hope you love both. Thank you so much. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, bring a book wherever you go. All right, take care of yourselves. Have a great night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.